The following program is a co-production of Seattle Channel and Seattle City Club and sponsored by Comcast.
The Seattle Police Department enters a new chapter under new leadership.
When people call 911, they don't care whether you have enough staffing or not. They're needing help.
Now, a lot of people just out there breaking stuff and saying Black Lives Matter.
And Seattle's plan to teach students when face-to-face learning is lost.
We surveyed families, and what we heard loud and clear is live learning, set schedules, common platforms, and so we have built systems going into the fall.
It's all coming up on Civic Cocktail.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the fall season of Civic Cocktail. My name is Joni Balter, and we have a great show for you tonight. Our guests this evening are Interim Seattle Police Chief Adrian Diaz, the night before he starts his new job. Thank you so much for joining us. And Reverend Harriett Walden, founders of Mothers for Police Accountability and a longtime human rights activist. Thank you so much for being here as well.
You're
Chief,
welcome.
tomorrow's the first day on the job. On day one, what are you going to do tomorrow? And what are you going to do differently from your predecessor?
You know, I'm already going to have so many challenges ahead. We're still dealing with the COVID pandemic. We have officers that have been impacted by COVID. We have officers that are in isolation and quarantine. So we always have to make sure that we're paying attention to that. We're dealing with nightly demonstrations. We've had an increase in shootings that have led to increase in homicides. We've actually been focused on having community discussions on race and policing, talking about defunding, low morale, and then also what we also have to focus on is building relationships in the community. And these are all areas that, you know, this is just from day one. And then this is what we build upon over the next several months about how we actually address these issues.
Well, what in your view are like the top quick steps that you could take to reimagine policing?
Well, right now we have to make sure that we have enough staffing and patrol to handle our 911 calls. That is so crucial for public safety in this city.
You made a change on that today already, right?
Today I announced that I was moving 100 officers from a variety of different units back into patrol. It is the core of what we do. It is the backbone of our department, is being able to handle our 911 responses. And so that is one of the first steps that we're starting off the day.
So I want to come back to that in a little bit, but I want to bring in Reverend Harriett Walden. As everyone knows, another Black man has been shot by police, this time in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Reverend, you've been working on this issue for decades. What can we do to stop this awful pattern?
One of the things we can do is actually look at history and tell the truth about it, and just examine why I number one, if the Black people, African Americans, colored, and once we've been Negroes, we've been hunted for a long, long time. And even Harriet Tubman, all the way back to Harriet Tubman, trying to free people that was in bondage. So there is something fundamentally in the soil and in the hearts of the American people that has not been dealt with. And until we really tell the truth, and this is the time to tell the truth. It really is. I mean, this is an auspicious time. We can tell the truth about race in America, and that the 1916 dictionary says that he was afraid of a Negro. It's called Negrophobia. It's in the dictionary. And all the words in the dictionary, in those dictionaries that allow people to be afraid of us, is probably part of the problem that we have today.
Reverend, but you have the chief's ear right here. Give him some advice. What one or two changes, must-do changes? He has a long list of things to do, but what one or two changes could he make right off the top that would make a difference to improve policing here?
I think one of the things he can actually do is to actually try to engage with young people. I mean, because that really is what's going on right now, is young people. I mean, we talk about what's happening on one side of the equation, but Chief Diaz mentioned the other side of the equation, the escalation of violence in our community. These are both and situations in our community, and we need people who are willing to work in both and ways. Talk about how the police has harmed us and continue to harm us, but also talk about how we are harming ourselves. And I think he's willing. I think he's willing to talk about that and maybe get out with talk with the young people and actually show them another path. The way there is a path to better your life, and it doesn't have to be in crime, and it doesn't have to be in those kind of things that young people get trapped in. And I think Chief Diaz has a great story. He could tell his story.
He has a lot of experience in youth violence prevention. That's
right.
That's right.
That's right. That's right. And I think that he could reimagine that piece and get our youth on a better footing.
Chief, demonstrations continue, as you mentioned, in Seattle. Most are peaceful, but some have, left behind the shattered windows and some fires. How are you going to manage that? How is that going to roll in your administration?
We want to make sure that we're honoring, the people's right to peacefully protest. That hasn't changed. We have many protests every day that we do not actually have to respond to or be a part of. And so we want to make sure that, and sometimes we are a part of just making sure that we're honoring the free flow of traffic. But, there are different, I don't want to call them demonstrations, because they're people that are looking out for violence. They're actually missing the cause of what people are actually struggling and fighting for. And so those that are fighting for those violence, the acts of Molotov cocktails, lighting things on fire, creating property damage and destruction, assaulting people, those are the things that we're going to have to deal with. And it's a much smaller group, and it's much more, coordinated. And those are the efforts that we're going to be focused on.
So, and this is for both of you. What about arresting protesters who do property damage? In other words, to draw that line and protect property. I know there's another view on that property doesn't matter so much, but Joe Biden, for example, drew that line this week. And I guess he's got a big ad campaign coming out about that point. So I'd like to hear from you, Reverend, first about what about that as an approach?
Well, I'm from the old school, and I'm glad to be from the old school. I mean, when people used to come and protest and come looking for us, they burned us out and that kind of stuff. So I would never, ever agree to the fact that it's okay to burn property down. Okay, I used to own a business, and as a business owner, small business owner, I think it's very harmful for small business. And look at Seattle now. What is the way forward? How will Seattle rebuild? What are the city elected people going to do to help rebuild Seattle? I think if a person is caught setting a fire, I think the prosecutor needs to prosecute that as a crime. Really and truly. And also, one aside, if there were all those was African Americans out there, it would be a whole different story. I mean, really and truly. So white privilege is part of this, and it's been going on some level ever since the May Days in Seattle. So we got to look at how long we've the young people been actually doing this, and then how you're going to corral it. And I just think that we have to say it's okay to protest, but it's not okay to set other people's businesses on fire. It's just not okay to do that.
And Chief, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
So what about drawing that line that, property damage, arrest?
Those are the things that we are focused on right now is that as property damage occurs, we also have to make sure that we are safe in our response to being able to safely make those arrests and not spark a whole level of more violence. So we have to be mindful of that. But yes, we are, trying to address the crimes that are occurring. And like I said, it is a much smaller group of population. It is not a large scale, it's not part of our large scale demonstrations that we're seeing this. Even when we had 60,000 or 80,000 people marching down 23rd, we didn't have any property damage. So right now we are just focused on those that are committed to that type of destruction.
Reverend, when we spoke last week, you said that the Black Lives Matter movement has been hijacked. How so?
Well, it's hijacked because now a lot of people just out there breaking stuff and saying Black Lives Matter. And, Black lives has always mattered. I mean, let's be clear. That's what Harriet Tubman was talking about. That's what she was doing. Black lives have always mattered. And now, we're saying, the movement is about other people realizing that And I just think that they have hijacked it. I mean, really, I mean, it's not anything to
Who's
do about
they?
Mr. Floyd. Well, I
Who's
mean, other people. I mean, they are a lot of people who show up that don't look like black people. Number one, they've never spent a day in our shoes, and it's okay for them to be our allies, but it's not okay for them to come actually and destroy property or either. I mean, and get in other people's faces. That piece is just not okay. I'm from my perspective, and I have 70 decades on the planet, and so I have a right to speak from my perspective. And from my perspective, I think that the movement has been hijacked in a lot of different places, and they're out there just having themselves a good time. Remember, there's no jobs right now. There's no school to go to. So hey, if they had to go to work tomorrow, some of them probably would be home.
Chief, I'd like your response to that, and I'd like to understand, how do police separate? They're in the heat of things, and there's, different factions that are trying to make statements and conducting themselves in different ways. You have the example in Portland, where that was different people, different agendas.
Yeah, this is the difficulty right now of being able to separate when you do have people that infiltrate large scale crowds that actually, are there to cause damage. Those are the hard parts of our jobs, of trying to separate that out. And I think right now, for the rest that we have made over the last several weeks, it has been a much smaller group, and it hasn't been part of the larger type of demonstration that we've seen. Initially, when this started happening in the initial phases of the George Floyd murder, and I think Reverend Walden is right. We, I think if we look at our past history of policing in America, we have to own our past, and we've looked at a lot of the different how we handle demonstrations in the 40s and 50s and 60s through the civil rights movement. We have to own that past, but we have to also learn and grow for the future. And that's where I'm committed to making sure that our police department is learning from these experiences and making it better and how we handle these type of demonstrations.
Reverend,
One thing too, can I ask you one? I just want to put one thing. When we were doing this, we had peacekeepers. I mean, the American Friends Service used to actually train peacekeepers. Every demonstration we ever had, we had peacekeepers there. I mean, because the peacekeepers.
What does a peacekeeper do?
They are trained to spot people who are coming to cause trouble, and the peacekeepers guide those people out of the demonstration and actually make sure that
escort them out. Escort them out.
That's right. That's what peacekeepers are there for a reason. And younger people, I mean, the way that they organize, I mean, we took full responsibility whenever we had a rally, a demonstration, or whatever. We took full responsibility, and everybody knew that we were leading this, and so we wasn't leaderless. I mean, and so by taking responsibility, we also had peacekeepers to be able to keep people safe. If people are coming, if they're bringing their children, or if somebody's pregnant, I mean, it was our responsibility to make sure that those people were safe. And that's what we did. We made sure we had peacekeepers.
Reverend, do we need an East Precinct? You told me that you were asked this very question by Seattle City Council member Shama Sawant.
Well, she called and asked me if I would sign off on it being closed and turned into a community center. And I told her no, because it belongs to the African American community. I was there because of the late Sam Smith, the first African American that's ever elected to the Seattle City Council. And then how could you deprive 120,000 people in that sector without any police protection? I mean, it's 120,000 people or more that lives in East Precinct, and that is south of I-5, over by Montlake Cut, all the way down to I-90, from the International District all the way down to Lake Washington. All of those people, and you were going to deprive them of a precinct. And East Precinct clearly belongs to us, and we want to see it open eventually, and Sam Smith named up there as a history part of Seattle. And I don't think people want to go back to the days when a car has to come, or a call has to come from downtown Seattle or either out on the south end, because that's what was happening before East Precinct. And shame on Sawant to say that and the charter says it's supposed to be open, and she was an elected official wanting to deprive her district a police protection when somebody needs to call the police. And if somebody in that area needs to call the police, then they need to get a response when they need to.
Chief, you told me last week you already have been contacted by 4 of the 9 city council members. The number may have gone up since we talked. I wonder, in your view, is this pro forma, or is this a real change from maybe the way the relations were with your predecessor and your good friend, Chief Carmen Best?
I actually think we all want, I believe we all want, to reimagine community safety. We all want public safety. So I believe that it is true for those that have reached out. I've actually had more reach out over the last, several days. And so I'm actually looking forward. I've already been meeting with a couple members over the last couple weeks. And I believe these are honest, open discussions. I'm looking forward to working with them as we look through the 2020 budget and into the 2021 budget about what policing can look like in the city of Seattle.
So I have an audience question from Rufus for Chief Diaz. Your predecessor was criticized for not doing enough to restrain officers who responded to peaceful protesters with violence. Will you take a different approach?
Right now we learned a lot from the first couple of weeks of the George Floyd murders demonstrations, and right now we actually are seeing a different type of rioting situation over the last several weeks that are occurring at night. So we have learned from that past, and we're looking at and having conversations with people all over this world, from France and from England and from Ireland, that have handled demonstrations in different manners, locally and nationally, to other police departments that can learn and handle demonstrations better. So we are committed to doing things better. But some of the things that are occurring at night, last night we had 2 Molotov cocktails that were thrown at the East Precinct. We had a fire set a week before that.
Was anybody injured by that?
No one was injured from last night. But the week before, we had the precinct set on fire as well. And so those are different responses. Those, because people are trying to light the East Precinct on fire, that isn't just about protecting the East Precinct, it's protecting that whole block. Many of that building is made up of 100-year-old timbers. And so an impact of a firestorm there could impact the apartments that are right next to the precinct. So we have to make sure that we are providing overall protection for that whole city block.
Chief, I'd like to talk about you for a second. You specifically, all the reporting says, you're very well liked. We already mentioned you have a pretty good background in youth violence prevention and community outreach, but you have little to no operational experience. How do you overcome that if you want the permanent chief job? And while we're at it, do you want the permanent chief job?
Yeah, I actually, over the course of my career, I actually worked in an anti-crime team. So I actually gained a lot of operational experience. We served in an anti-crime team. You serve and handle operations in the street level, sometimes related to narcotics. You do serve warrants. And so those are areas where I've already had experience in. I was on a mountain bike for many years in downtown Seattle, handling demonstrations. So I had that operational experience. I have promoted up, and I've handled a couple of the different large-scale events in this city. So I do have some operational experience, but what you also have to realize when you're a leader, that you don't always have to know everything about each and every component of the job. And it's making sure that you have the right command staff in place that can fill those roles where you have weaknesses. And so, and that's what we have right now, is we have a very competent command staff team that can fill those areas that I don't have as many strengths in. And you just have to know your team.
And do you want the permanent job? Have you decided that?
Yeah. So I've been asked that question a couple of times. I would say I didn't ask for this job when things were going well and quiet. I'm asking for this job and doing this job when things are the most difficult time. I kind of gave you a list of all the different challenges that we're dealing with, that I'm faced with, and I'm willing to take those on head on and willing to actually make adjustments. And it just shows you today, moving 100 officers, That has never happened in the course of our history, of our department's history. And I'm willing to make those leadership changes right away.
And is that moving of the officers there, does that have something to do with overtime, or is that just how you want to see things go as you're
No,
running this department?
there's a lot of reasons for moving. Number one, we've kind of reduced our patrol staffing levels to critically low levels. We were not even able to make minimum standards as far as having officers being able to handle just your normal 911 responses. Many times we were handling just priority calls for service. And so as we got to critically low levels, I wanted to make sure that we had enough officers to support patrol and making sure that it had adequate staffing. That's one. Number two, it actually reduces our overtime by not actually augmenting shifts. And so there are many reasons why we are having to do this, but right now, operationally, it is ensuring that we are able to respond to people's calls for service. When people call 911, they don't care whether you have enough staffing or not. They're needing help. And so we have to make sure that our staffing is appropriate to ensure that they get the help that they need.
Reverend Walden, the city council, at least briefly here, bought into basically a protest slogan, defund 50%. How does that phrase help or hurt the goal of improved policing?
Well, I don't think that it helps a lot when you actually get down to the bottom of it and look at it. You cut 50%, the Seattle police and any other police, you're going to have to lay off officers, and you're not going to have adequate police protection. And the city of Seattle have almost 780,000 people in there. And I think that some of those people in those areas need adequate policing. I think there are some places that we could talk about, reimagining and also distribution of resources. I mean, and that's really, I think that's really what it's about. Is how do you look at shifting some of the resources and have some other agencies or other community groups up and running, but a lot of the groups is not. I mean, they're up and running, but they still have to get up to the standard to be able to take on all the work that some of the SPD is doing in a lot of areas. So I think it's a good. I think it's it's a buzzword, and everybody's reading the book out there, The End of Policing, and that's the new Bible now. And so that's every now and then you get a new buzzword, and this is really auspicious time for change in the world, and it will be changed. But my goal is for all the voices to be heard, and for us to have a clear path of being able to work together and bring all the people to the table, the right and the left, and the people in the middle. I believe they need to stand up so they can help organize this path in the middle to go forward.
So yeah, we've invited our audience to participate, and we have a question from Maria for Chief Diaz. You mentioned the difference between protesters and demonstrators. What can you do to encourage the media to do the same?
I think that's really a discussion for the media. But one of the things that we just have to make sure we're clearly outlining what is actually occurring in the streets. I know many of media members have been harassed, have been been pushed to the point where they're not supposed to film in these groups to avoid capturing some of the different destruction that has occurred, and many of them have reported out on that. And I think that's what we have to make sure that people are reporting the facts, and that the information that they're getting out to the public is the truth. And so that's really some of the things that I think the media will end up having to look at themselves and say, are we reporting exactly what is occurring out there? And that's what we encourage.
Reverend Walden, protesters crossed a line for some people when they went sort of many nights in a row to the homes of council members this summer. What advice did you or would you give to protesters about that approach?
Well, I mean, I guess it's a different time, but like I said, when people, I grew up in segregation. Let me be clear. I grew up in Jim Crow. And when people were coming to your house, they were coming to burn you out. They were actually coming to kill you or to burn you out. So that's ingrained in me. That's part of my DNA. And so I'm absolutely would be opposed to that. I mean, I think that I think that people should protest and protest where they work at, But going to people's homes, to me, just brings back memories of people just being burned out, and I think it's very disrespectful. Because really, we have allowed the discourse to go down, 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 down. And at what point do we believe that we can actually come together and bring people together, and to go out to Councilmember Juarez's house and spray paint and call people bad, all these
Bad
names? It's
words.
like, wow. Beg pardon?
I said there were
Yeah.
some bad words. I happened to see
Well,
some
and
pictures of those.
but
Yes.
that doesn't get you anywhere. And I'm glad I came through when people I actually wanted to organize a different way and to have a level of decorum about them. And I think you can still do that. I mean, we don't all have to be in the gutter, because leadership around the country might be that way. I think our job is to find the middle road, to find that other path out there, and to be able to encourage people, to be able to bring them along, and also register to vote. If you're going to people's homes like that, I hope you're registered. I hope you can really make a big difference in November. If not, you just going to people's homes.
Another audience question. This from Sarah for Chief Diaz. Who from the community are you consulting with over the budget and reform, and how did you select these representatives?
Actually, we, as a city, the mayor's office, Department of Neighborhoods, our police department have actually been holding a variety of different town hall types of events. We've actually met with all of the different commissions, from Immigrant and Refugee Commission, Women's Commission, that are a part of the city, that are made up of community members. So we've actually been listening to a variety of different people. When it comes to the budget, we're actually in conversations with the city council and the mayor's office about what reimagining and re-envisioning the police department looks like. And those will be for broader discussions, more throughout the community as we move forward. And I think we want to make sure that all of us are at the table, included in listening to all groups that are out there. And I've actually had meetings with some of the different demonstrations or some of the different groups that have been protesting out there over the last several weeks, and listening to their demands. And I've been willing to have those conversations with them. And on several occasions of their demands, there are areas where I've actually worked in the community, working on many of those issues. Some of it is in relation to youth violence and decertification of police officers that have been fired for wrongdoing. So there are areas that we can actually see some level of common ground, and some areas we might not see that common ground.
Reverend Walden, you told me when we spoke last week, everybody needs to chill out, sort of as how to go forward. What are you trying to say?
What I'm trying to say is that as fall comes and the summer of love is over and we're moving into fall, how can we actually imagine a place of Seattle being a child's place again? What can we bring to the table? What can we create going forward that Seattle will be a place for all people? And like I said, we're willing to work on that. Because we know there's other voices out there. People are calling me all the time, and from Positive Seattle, about how can they get involved, what can they do to be able to be part of that center path of walking the middle road, as Rick Williams said on Sunday, being a peaceful warrior. And then we can learn a lot from the Native community on how to walk that road and that kind of stuff. So that's what I'm about. I want to build bridges. That's what mothers have done. That's why we still around. We build bridges so other people could walk across them. We're absolutely bridge builders. We stay at the table. We continue to work. Through it all, we just never go home, and we're bringing up some younger people who actually like to stay at the table. As my granddaughter says, grandma, we going to a meeting. They grew up loving to go to meetings. So we're raising up some more kids that love to go to meetings so we can be at these tables.
And Chief, from you, I'd like to know what do we do to begin healing? We really have been through a tough summer. We have been through a lot of stuff. We have Republicans using Seattle as like a caricature of a city that is filled with mobs. You get these calls from people saying, "Is Seattle okay?" And so, how do we begin the healing?
I think, we have to be willing to be uncomfortable. We have to be able to step out of our ability to just stay with the norm and be able to listen to others with differing opinions. And I think sometimes those are the challenges, because we're so comfortable listening to those that have the same viewpoints. But I think for even our police department, our officers, they have to understand the community. They have to understand the trauma that many of them have experienced. But also, we want the community to understand that officers are also experiencing a variety of levels of trauma. They're responding to shootings and homicides, and having to take kids away from families that have neglected them. I mean, and so that exposure over the course of their career can also create an impact for them. And so there's a lot of trauma that both parties are experiencing, and we want to have those conversations to understand each other. It's always about listening and being able to have tough conversations.
Well, I could talk to both of you for a very long time, but I am out of time here. We have been talking with Reverend Harriett Walden. She's the founder of Mothers for Police Accountability, and Adrian Diaz, Seattle's interim police chief. Thank you both so much. We're coming back in a few minutes with Denise Juneau, Superintendent of Seattle Public Schools. And we are back. Thanks for joining us. I am so happy to be sitting here with Seattle School Superintendent Denise Juneau. Greetings. Thank you for being here. Superintendent, school starts this week, but it won't be like regular school, right? It's going to look a little different. So could you tell us what it'll be like in the early days, the first part of the month, and then after? What are we looking at?
Yeah, so we are starting in a remote setting, so it's going to be unlike any year that we've ever kicked off school. Our teachers have been engaged in some professional development or training over the past few days. That will continue tomorrow. And then school starts Friday, and we'll have all our students logging on for the first day of school. We are actually going to do what's called a strong start. And what we want our educators to do is to reach out to families and to students and make sure they're building really strong relationships. As you know, every year you get a new batch of students in front of you, and in person allows you to really build relationships. And so because we're in a different setting, our educators will be reaching out and making those relationships, making sure everybody's set up with the technology they need, making sure that we're setting everybody up for success.
But there's a difference between the early days of the month and the second half. Can you tell us so parents actually know what to?
Yeah, so
they probably know. But
the first week will be the strong start, where we're just building relationships, making sure everybody's set up, making sure that they're the setup is for success, and then we'll be moving into our schedule of there will be. We heard loud and clear from families during our closure in the spring that they needed more on live learning. And so our educators will be, guests in everybody's home of sorts. They will be engaged in live learning, so providing mini lessons, providing some, small group settings for students, maybe some one-on-one tutoring. So students won't be online all day long. That's not what we're set up to do. It is
so they'll throw a lesson toward them and then we'll get back and we'll check and see,
right. It will
what
be
happened
like,
with that.
all of our Zoom meetings, or our Teams meetings, we are in spaces where a teacher will provide a short lesson, have conversation with students. So be trying to recreate those types of classrooms, but in a virtual setting.
Many parents, of course, are legitimately worried that their children are falling behind during this time, aren't they? In all honesty, it's falling behind?
It's difficult. I mean, when we, the entire country went, had to close the doors to their school buildings, and everybody had to engage in emergency crisis education when COVID-19 hit the country. And, I'm on calls with superintendents across the country, superintendents in the region, and everybody struggled. Everybody struggled to really try to make that pivot into providing remote learning. And so, it was rocky, and there were, gaps. There were kids who did not have technology, kids who did not have access to internet, and so there are certainly gaps that needed to be filled over this next fall.
And what gives you confidence that your school system, 53,000 students, is really ready for it to be any different or any better, that they will not be falling
Right.
behind this fall.
Well, we learned so many lessons, and we actually had a really great summer school. So we had 400 educators who taught summer school. We learned a lot from them. We surveyed families, and what we heard loud and clear is live learning, set schedules, common platforms, and so we have built systems going into the fall.
So I probably need a definition for live learning.
Yeah.
What is the definition?
So live learning will be when a teacher actually and a classroom are online together. And so that's when they'll provide the mini lesson, they'll have conversations in real time. And then there will be a section where it's sort of on-demand learning, where students will be able to go in and maybe grab some other lessons to dive deeper into the content on their own time.
But so does everybody stay in that virtual experience, or some people get to go do their work separately?
During the live lesson, yes, they will all be engaged, just like if we were sitting in a classroom all together.
And then these guys go over here and do
Yep,
something.
and so then there will be small groups, and maybe there's some individual tutoring that goes on. And so we're trying to recreate that type of setting, but in a virtual world.
How does online learning, you mentioned this the other day when we were talking, how does that impact brand new students, kindergartners? I mean, they never get the moment to feel what a real classroom is.
Right. Well, this will be real for them, right? This will be their first step into a school system. It's going to be difficult. I mean, but our educators, are, like I said, they're engaged in some training this week. It is a different world for them as well. But they know that there have to be some really engaging lessons, that there has to be a setup. I mean, they'll also be learning technology probably for the first time. And so there's all kinds of things that have to happen, all kinds of new learning. But our educators are going to engage in that task and make sure that our students are engaged in learning.
I'm sure that some of what is bothering parents, and this makes a lot of sense if you think about it, is sort of the emotional day-to-day of this. They have students sitting in front of computers for a very long time. They're not with their friends. They may actually have some emotional problems that are going to come out because of this time. How much of this is on the district, and what can be done about that?
Yeah, I mean, part of our strong start this first week and throughout the year, we're trying to build in time where there are these check-ins. Sort of, we know that there's going to have to be social emotional supports for students. They haven't been together for a semester now. They haven't been together for the summer. They're going into a place where they're not going to be in person, and so much of human relationship depends on interpersonal contact. And so we are going to spend a lot of time engaged in check-ins. How are students feeling? How
Is that part of the school day, or it's
part of the
just
school day? So the first week, the strong start will be built in, and then the schedules as they roll out will have check-ins and sort of mental health check-ins and social emotional learning sort of built into the school day.
And then are counselors available if somebody picks up something that needs a little bit more attention?
Yeah, I mean, our special professionals, like the counselors, the librarians, art teachers, everybody will still be engaged in their respective role. And so there will be all these touch points that our scholars will be able to engage with.
So I'm an adjunct professor at Seattle University, and we've all spent part of the summer trying to learn, try to get up to speed, to flip our classroom to virtual. I have to say I still have a lot to learn. I don't know how effective it will be. But what kind of training were you able, what kind of time were you able, and what kind of training did you give to your teachers? Because this is definitely a different way of doing things.
During the spring when we're doing emergency crisis education, I mean, our educators really rose to the challenge and learned technology really quickly of being in rooms virtually. And so taking what our 400 educators provided, the learning that happened over the summer school. I mean, we had 15,000 students who engaged in summer school.
Is that a bigger number because they felt like they fell behind?
It was a huge number, and so I think that's really, as people were engaged in trying to catch up, they were trying to get enrichment activities, and so we usually, this is 3, 4, 5 times the number that we usually have.
So they knew they were falling behind, and they thought summer school would be a way to kind of either reaffirm lessons that had gone through March, or just find a way.
Getting back up to speed, and so being able to start strong in the fall again, and now we are going, we have common start times this school year. We have common sort of chunks of time of how much time an educator needs to spend in live learning, what types of lessons. And so they're getting curricular issues, they're getting anti-racist education training, they are getting training on the platforms that we're using. And I think really what is going to be different and what's going to feel different as part of the experience in homes for remote learning is it's going to be more consistent and predictable than it was in the spring. That there will be all these common platforms and common times that our families and students can rely on.
I see. Clearly, the biggest worry about this is the technology. How do we get everybody up to speed? And computers and hotspots, what can possibly go wrong, right?
Right.
So in fact, you are providing hotspots and computers for all of your students. Is that correct? Well, and you have an Alaska Airlines heroic thing today.
Yeah, we had great news today. So our district is moving to what we call a one-to-one device, which really means every student in our district will have a device, either a laptop or an iPad. We were able to order enough laptops through the spring to now for our third grade through 12th grade. Those are being distributed at schools this week. We had a supply chain issue with iPads, so we are providing iPads for our kindergarten through second grade. And so every district in the country right now really, wants devices, and so there was just a congestion in the supply chain. Our iPads landed in Boston and sort of got stuck. And so, it was like, what's going to happen? We need to get these out to our kindergarten and second graders. And so I called former Governor Chris Gregoire, who heads up Challenge Seattle, which is just a group of companies that come together and try to figure out the thorny issues that are happening.
She has them all on speed dial, I think.
Yes, and so I called her up and I was like, Governor, I need a plane. And so she called Alaska Air. Alaska Air flew out to Boston, loaded up those iPads, and got them here. And we had a great event today.
Oh, okay.
So we have 12,000 iPads now that are getting ready to be shipped out to schools so that those can be distributed to our kindergarten through second grade.
I see. So will some schools do some of the hybrid, meaning there would be some in class? Do you have any schools doing that this year?
Not to start out. We do have, if special education, if there are students with an individual education plan or IEP with special needs, that in their IEP it is written that they need in-person instruction. There will be some in-person instruction started then. The interesting thing is our board recently passed a resolution that is going to open the doors a bit for us to be a little more innovative moving forward. And so looking at outdoor education or looking at community schools, they want us to think big about how are we going to make sure that students, particularly students of color furthest from educational justice, are staying engaged. And if that requires some meeting in outdoor spaces, then how are we going to make that happen?
So I love the idea of outdoor learning, but I'm wondering how long into the calendar year, this is Seattle,
right?
How long into the calendar year and where would be the venue for that?
Well, and that's why, it's part of a resolution for us to work with the city, work with other community-based organizations. We have, playgrounds and we have fields that can be accessed. And so those are all the moving pieces that need to be determined. And, there's still protocols and processes that have to be put in place for health and safety. And so we'll be looking at all those. We're not quite there yet because we really want to make sure that we're starting school remotely in a really strong way. And then there will be a task force that helps us come together. And if there are schools that want to do pilot programs, that we can
little freedom to innovate.
Innovation that can happen, let's figure out how to support those efforts. What can we learn from them that can then be spread across the district?
I see. So audience question from Rufus. How will you balance the need for safety with the requirements of individualized education programs?
Yeah, so I think that is, we always follow the advice of public health. I mean, that is what sort of closed our building doors. It kept us closed this fall, that, when there was the at the time that we made the decision to go to remote, public health was saying, the spike in transmission rates was really skyrocketing, and so we had to make a decision.
Talking about back in March.
Yeah. And so we always balance that. They give us guidelines about when we are signing into buildings. These are the types of protocols that need to be in place. This is the type of PPE that's necessary. We're following all those rules, all those guidelines. And so if people have to access our buildings, all of those are in place.
So back to the outdoor education for 1 second. I had a crazy idea for outdoor learning. What about T-Mobile Park? And I'm thinking taxpayers paid a lot of money for that roof. And the place sits there, many days, and I'm just wondering if, be cold in there, but you could prevent the downpour on the books. Anybody call? Anybody have any ideas on that?
Nobody's called yet, but we're open to all those calls. I think that there are a lot of places around the city that we can start looking at, following the board's resolution about let's be innovative, let's think about how we can get students in person for those that really need access to humans, right? And to make sure that, every now and then you need to set your eyes on somebody in real life. And so how can we make those kinds of things happen?
Well, with that in mind, what do you think of learning pods? Some families and neighborhoods are forming these. First, are they safe? That's one question. And then second, are they equitable?
Well, those are both questions that, safe, I think, has to be determined by those parents who are forming those pods. The reason we're not coming back to in-person is because, there are some health concerns of having adults and students all in the same place. If they're all learning together, that's one thing. And I'm not sure about the answer about safety. Equitable, I think the answer is definitely no. By forming pods, and having the privilege to be able to do that leaves a lot of people out, and it allows those who don't have the privilege to come together, still in a remote setting, not being able to engage in that. So the idea is that outdoor, if we can find outdoor places, if we can find community-based organizations, if we can pull in some other resources. The city has been a great partner, and they're going to open up these teen hubs so that there can be gathering spaces. We have to figure out the equity issues as that moves along.
Well, if they're not equitable, you wouldn't move to stop them.
No, those are parent choices. Yeah. And frankly, right now, families can't make a wrong choice for themselves and for their students and their children.
So it has to be very flexible that, right?
I think that is going to be the name of the game going forward. We have to be so flexible, and we have to provide each other grace. Things are going to be glitchy, and things will go wrong. And, I think it's just a reminder that we're all in this together. We are willing to adjust. We're willing to change course. We can do all these things. It takes a little bit of time, but flexibility is going to be the name of the game.
President Trump wants students back in school, but schools are the ultimate local government. Do you think Governor Jay Inslee was right to recommend online learning for most counties in our state, including King County?
Yeah, I think the governor's done a great job as far as mitigating and monitoring COVID-19, making sure that people are wearing masks, putting rules and regulations in for restaurants. And so I think his guidance to keep school buildings closed right now is a good one, that he is listening to the science and the data and the public health, and that's what we should all be doing.
So audience question now from Cam. Since this is the first time we've ever started the school year online, is there a plan for evaluating and adjusting the strategy? Do you have, moments in time to figure out if it's working?
Yeah, and actually part of the board resolution that passed when we were approving the remote learning plan is to put a task force in place. And so we'll be pulling on our community members to really, let's create a system, and then let's check in on the system, and let's work with public health, and let's determine where are those areas that we're going to need to adjust and be flexible moving forward. And so we'll be putting together a task force that will help us monitor our structures, our system, And then, of course, looking forward about where does the public health advice need to be so that we can start thinking about coming back either in what we had planned for a hybrid approach, coming back fully in person, looking at other spaces. And so we'll be relying on our community task force to help guide that conversation.
When coronavirus first hit back in March and even into April, schools were reluctant to continue to be open because even to do some of the virtual things that were available for equity issues. A lot of parents were upset that days and weeks went by, students weren't really learning much. Do you have any regrets about that?
I think we just learned a lot from. We had a lot of lessons that we learned over that time, and it's hard to look back and think of a different decision that could have been made at that point. I mean, we are just now getting to one-to-one devices, right? We still have an issue with internet, and we are talking at the very basic level, access to public education. Right now means that every student has a device that works, that they have internet so that they can access education, and that they have a setup. I mean, there's just so many issues that we need to look at. And so I think still it was the right call. I think that we learned a lot of lessons. I think we are stronger now because of the lessons we learn now going forward.
So how much are you working with local tech companies to provide the computers? You said you're paying for them, and Wi-Fi access. Are they helping?
Oh,
are they
sure.
involved?
I mean, Amazon in the spring stepped up and provided 8,200 Chromebooks for our elementary students who did not have a device.
And did that go pretty quickly?
Yeah. And so, I mean, they were gone in a couple days. And we are working with Comcast, to provide reduced or free internet for some families. There were companies, C-City, which is sort of a group of tech companies.
Yeah, I read your op-ed about that. They're is it actual tech support? So if your students hooked up and doing a lesson, and then something goes wrong, you can actually call this nonprofit C-City?
We as a district can provide support for our staff. We can provide tech support for our students. We don't have the capacity to really fill in the gaps for family tech support.
So these folks would show up at your house and start playing around with the wires, or what?
They have a call. So if there's assistance that needed, they call. But the great thing is that they also provided other language speakers who could connect with families who spoke languages other than English. And so they were phenomenal at helping families engage with the technology, making sure that they knew how to connect, making sure that they had the right software on, and they'll continue that effort going forward. So it's just super. So yes, a lot of companies Microsoft stepped up and provided some things. And so it was one interesting component that happened is, I believe it was Amazon stepped up, and we really, tried to focus in on really our vulnerable students. And so students experiencing homelessness, getting them a device and making sure they had a hotspot and access to the internet during this closure. So they stepped up and provided these wireless extenders in some of the shelters around town so that students didn't have to sit in a crowded, noisy common area, that they could actually go do their schoolwork elsewhere. And so just being really thoughtful about how everybody can pull together and support students. And I think that's really been a really great lesson and a really good outcome for our city is everybody's pulling together and making sure that we're filling gaps as much as we can to provide our scholars a really great education.
Question from the audience, from Sarah. Most IEPs were not written with the idea that specificity was needed for in-person learning. That was assumed. How will IEPs be updated urgently to make sure all children who need in-person learning have their IEPs updated?
So our special education department is really engaged in that, and they know that they have to look at every single IEP in our district. So that will take a while, but they are engaged in that work right now, and so they will be looking at that, following the process of IEPs and determining, because we're in a new setting, what needs are necessary moving forward.
The city announced this week that it is investing nearly $95 million from the city levy to improve programs that address race-based disparities in education and also to boost college and career readiness. How can that help us really quickly since.
Yeah, I mean, that's their levy dollars, right? Those are the dollars that, thank you taxpayers, that they continue to provide. And those have been the work with schools that the city has been doing. And so it really is sort of an ongoing program of sorts of their direct assistance to some schools in our system. And so just expanding on the opportunities that funding has provided will continue. We are really engaged with the city around making sure that we are working really closely with particularly the schools that they provide money to, and also, like these teen hub centers, child care providers. There's just a lot of nexus between the city and our school district that we continue to build upon.
When you and I spoke the other day, you highlighted the fact that Seattle Public Schools, the strategic plan emphasizes African American teens and boys. Mm-hmm. So how does that focus translate and figure into virtual learning?
Yeah, and so there are things, our strategic plan, we call it Seattle Excellence, is steeped in racial equity, and really asks us to look at and dismantle the racist structures within our organization. And so Seattle Public Schools has actually been engaged in deep racial equity work for years. And again, even the training with teachers over this week has some anti-racist education training built in, culturally responsive education. When we started delivering devices out in the spring, our strategic plan calls on us to focus on students of color first from educational justice with an intentional focus on African American teens and boys. And so when we deliver computers to the community or to our students, we make sure that our African American boys and teens are taken care of first. And so that really is the priority in all of our thinking, centering those voices, and making sure that we're engaging Black and African American families and communities.
And how does that focus sort of impact, other parts of academics like grading?
Yeah, and so, our top priority in our strategic plan is third grade reading. And so we have Seattle Super Readers. We have identified 13 schools in our district that have 50% of our African American male kindergarten through third grade, and so they get extra supports. We're trying to make sure that we're working really closely with those 13 schools to provide the supports that are necessary, so they build a strong literacy program, that we are providing books that are culturally relevant, that are written with Black characters, by Black authors, and really trying to make sure that we are focused in on engaging reading, on teaching literacy skills, and then providing any extra supports those schools need to get the job done.
What is your position on school resource officers in schools? That came up to be just a big issue as the protests were getting rolling through the summer.
It's a complicated issue for Seattle Public Schools. We had four. We had four what were called emphasis officers. We had one school resource officers in Seattle Public Schools, and so they weren't widespread. And Acting Chief Diaz or Interim Chief Diaz was one of the beginning people who helped start that program. And it started emphasis officers as a result of let's get in and provide mentoring to students. And so, it was a mixed bag. It was really hard because that is really a huge issue, I think, across the country. But speaking with the principals in those buildings who had emphasis officers, they were also doing good. Right now, the board passed a resolution. Let's take a pause, right? Yeah. Let's take a pause. Let's work with the police department. Let's make sure our values align. And let's make sure that if we're going to do this work together, how can we actually get it done so that our students continue to feel like their schools are safe places, and that everybody's working together on
And I have
issue.
to take a pause because we are out of time. We have been catching up with Seattle School Superintendent Denise Juneau. So much more to discuss, but we are out of time. Civic Cocktail returns in October, heat of the election season. Thank you so much for joining us, and good night.